Good evening and welcome to MetroFocus. I'm Rafael Pi Roman. White supremacist propaganda is on the rise across the country. That's the conclusion of a recent report from the Anti-Defamation League. According to the ADL, the number of incidents of hate groups posting flyers, stickers, banners, and posters in public places more than doubled in 2019 over the previous year, with a total of just over 2,700 cases nationally. That's the highest number of propaganda incidents the ADL has ever recorded. So what's driving this increase in white supremacist activity? And beyond the propaganda, what's driving anti-Semitic hate crimes right here in the greater metropolitan area? And joining us now with answers is Evan Bernstein, Vice President of the Northeast Division of the Anti-Defamation League. Evan, welcome back to the program.
Thank you so much for having me. Thank you.
So, Evan, this report, commissioned by the ADL, done by the ADL, was tracking white supremacist propaganda efforts across the country in 2019. Right. What exactly were you tracking, and what did you find?
Tracking flyering and different kinds of recruitment efforts that are taking place either on college campuses, in the town square, in different communities where they're openly recruiting, white supremacist groups are openly recruiting individuals to try to get them to join, to try to get them to go online to learn more about their groups and to become activated ultimately. And you know, as a report, the stats you mentioned, it's a record number of incidents that we saw across this country. In New York and New Jersey were two of the highest states involved in this. And
I was surprised to see that. I would have thought it's considered more of a blue state, liberal state.
That's right.
Both of those.
I think it shows that they're trying to recruit in any part of the country they possibly can, and I think it shows that they feel there's real opportunity here in the Northeast to be able to go out and recruit, and that going after that lone wolf, going after that individual that may be ready to act out and want to learn more about how to hate and find others around the country. These are the opportunities that they're going after.
So the propaganda is propagated where? Online, on campuses, and where?
What we tracked is the kind of flyering and the recruitment that we've seen on college campuses. We've saw flyering across towns in New Jersey, on campus in New York, that leads to online action. So what happens is you'll see a group that will put a flyer out. They'll actually do a mass flyering. They'll take a picture of it. Then they'll put the picture on Twitter to actually use the physical flyering to be able to then help recruit online. And then the flyers also driving people online as well. So that type of more old school recruitment that we're seeing, this increase, is actually leading to more people going on to the new world of white supremacist activity and extremist activity, which is really going online. And that's why we opened an office in Silicon Valley, because we know that's really where all this is ending up.
So what are some of the groups? Are they names that we would recognize, or are there new groups that are sprouting?
New groups. You have the New Jersey European Heritage Association, Patriot Front, other groups. You've certainly seen, the Klan and other groups. These are not necessarily large groups. This is not as the way it was necessarily back in the 50s and 60s with the Klan, where they had these large numbers. These are smaller groups that are trying to get that lone wolf. If they can get some people that want to be engaged, that's great. But they really are trying to get those people activated to act out.
So that's the key point when we had a conversation before that I had not seen. Because you look at these numbers and you look at what the report says was their success, which is kind of pathetic, Right. They post in a college campus and then they don't again because nobody apparently responds. And their numbers are scrawny. But that's not their only goal. No. The goal is to get, for example, somebody like the shooter in Pittsburgh, somebody like the shooter in Poway, and they'll be satisfied with that.
That's right, because that's them is ultimate success, is getting to that one person. It's casting a very large, wide net to try to get that one individual. Now you have to understand, as they're casting this net, they're changing hearts and minds, or helping change hearts and minds of a lot of other individuals. Even though they may not act out and do a mass shooting, it's changing our social society. As you see this kind of stuff happening, it becomes more normalized, especially for young people. You and I remember when this was not normal. If you're a teenager and you're seeing this uptick in your town, on campus, this is becoming the new normal, and it's allowing people to maybe say things they would not normally say, or act in ways they would not normally act. Maybe not in a murderous act, but maybe they would say something to an individual or talk to their children in a certain way and say things that maybe were such taboo a few years ago are no longer taboo, because you're seeing this societal change. It's becoming more normalized.
Hey, it's funny you say that, because I won't name the country, but I was in a South American country a couple of decades ago where anti-Semitism was on the streets. In conversations you'd overhear, you go, oh, wow, it's happening here now.
100%. and we're seeing it in K through 12 schools. This is all trickling down. When this is in the public square on college campus, one of the things that we're going to have with our audit that's going to come out in April is you're going to see this dramatic uptick in the number of anti-Semitic incidents, especially in New Jersey, on K through 12 schools, and that's a real shift.
Yeah. Evan, although this report is about right-wing, obviously white nationalist groups, the ADL and certainly you have never shied away from pointing out and talking about hate and anti-Semitic groups coming from the left.
Right.
But Barry Weiss, the author of How to Fight Anti-Semitism, has said that too many people on the left are hesitant to attack anti-Semitism from the left. Has that been your experience?
I think it's sometimes easier to go after the right because it's so in your face and it's such a short-term strategy they have. You see with the shooters or the flyering, and the left is a little bit more amorphous. And a lot of times the anti-Semitism that's on the left is wrapped around Israel. It's kind of harder to decode and kind of harder to figure out. It's becoming easier and easier now as we're seeing more and more of the anti-Israel cresting easily over into anti-Semitism, which allows for organizations like us to call it out much more easily and much more quickly because it's overt anti-Semitism. And you're certainly seeing that long game of hearts and minds around the Jewish community that's kind of centered around thoughts on Israel that's changing on college campuses, changing in public society, and we're seeing it now even coming out of more and more elected officials on the left.
And talking about normalizing it when young people hear it coming from college campuses, coming from the halls of Washington. Nothing normalizes it more than that.
That's right. Yeah. That's right. And we're seeing from candidates, it's a big problem that we're seeing.
So let's move from propaganda to some acts of hate right here in our region.
Right.
Could you please remind our viewers of some of the hate crimes, anti-Semitic hate crimes that we've experienced just over the last year?
I mean, I can go just in a 3.5, 4 week period, towards the end of the year in 2019 and 2020, when we dealt with and contended with everything that happened in Jersey City and then in Brooklyn and then in Muncie. I mean, in that short period of time, I was on the ground for an active shooter in Jersey City. So, you had the kosher market that was attacked, in Jersey City, an active shooter. We had 60 yeshiva students that were above thank God, law enforcement was able to contain those shooters in Jersey City and confine them to just what happened in law enforcement were true heroes, and to be on the ground for that and be with parents where thousands of students were sequestered in schools within a radius and with that active shooter taking place. And then actually then coming out it was a domestic terror act, through the Governor Murphy and the Attorney General of New Jersey. And then that settled down and that horrific incident took place. And then you had 10 acts anti-Semitic assault that took place over Hanukkah in Brooklyn. And then after that, you have the stabbing in Muncie. So the Jewish community went through, especially in this region, 3 distinct national incidents, nationally covered major incidents of anti-Semitism with assault or murder in less than a month's period of time, which is really almost unprecedented.
So who's doing this here, and why are they doing it? Are they being triggered in any respect by the white nationalist propaganda?
It's a very different. I think it's a great question because it shows that there's anti-Semitism really on both sides. Because if you look at what took place in Jersey City, that they were affiliated with the Black Hebrew Israelites, and you look at what happened in Brooklyn, and those were unfortunately a lot of communities of color and other minority groups that were attacking the Jewish community. And then you clearly look at what happened with the stabbing in Muncie, where it was an African-American individual who was the person that perpetrated that hateful act, the 5 people getting stabbed. Those are not people that are affiliated with white supremacists. And it shows that there is anti-Semitic tendencies in all parts of our society. And I think we can't just pigeonhole it with white supremacists. While these are some horrific acts and the numbers bear that out, we're also seeing some of the worst acts of anti-Semitism in this area that are being perpetrated by non-white supremacists.
So the last time you were here, we talked about this. We put a focus on the need for education.
That's right. That
because the kids are growing up ignorant of the history of anti-Semitism. What's the ADL doing about that?
So one of the things we're trying to do now is more Holocaust education. One of the programs we have is called Echoes and Reflections, where we train educators and students on the Holocaust. We feel that's more important than ever before. If you look at the claims conference numbers that they just came out with, that even Jewish students, young people, don't even know how many people were killed in the Holocaust. They don't know what Auschwitz or Birkenau was. And it's our job to ensure that they understand their history so that it doesn't happen again, and they can tell other non-Jews exactly what happened. Because if the Jewish community doesn't understand the Holocaust, then certainly the non-Jewish community is not understanding it as well. So I think that is just clearly really important. I think hate clearly is a learned behavior. We need to do more in public schools to show that this kind of bias and rhetoric that we're seeing becoming normalized is not normal, and we need to get to these young people as soon as possible. We've worked with Borough President Eric Adams in Brooklyn to help double in the last 6 months the number of schools that are no place for hate schools with the ADL that do anti-bias education. We've doubled the number of schools in Brooklyn just over the last 6 months, training tens of thousands of students to understand that bias of any kind, not including anti-Semitism, bias towards blacks, towards any other minority groups, Hispanic, immigrants. It's wrong and not normal, and we need to continuously do that and work with elected officials.
How are they doing, by the way, in this area, in the tri-state area, the politicians?
Well, I just sat with Governor Cuomo at his press conference where he is announcing a large plan and to fund and push back against anti-Semitism and hate. He's disgusted with the amount of anti-Semitism that's taking place in his state, and he knows he has to push back on that. I think it's a great example, along with Eric Adams, is elected officials that need to speak out, have a plan, fund the plan, and then implement that plan.
What about the rest of us? What can we do besides perhaps go to a vigil or two after an incident?
I think it's really important to get engaged in the process of thanking elected officials and also calling out elected officials, and the same with law enforcement. When you have a kind of law enforcement response that we've seen from NYPD here in Brooklyn, it's very easy to call out law enforcement when they do something wrong. It's very rare that the individuals in our community thank them. Call your local precinct if they do something really well. If they're preventing an act of hate, if they're responding to something, thank them for that. If an elected official speaks out like a Governor Cuomo or Eric Adams, call their office, thank them for doing that. But also clearly hold them accountable if you feel they're not doing what they need to do. And there's not every elected official is at the same level as the governor or the borough president of Brooklyn. If they're not responding in a way, you have to call them out. We as an organization have action alerts that go out every month that do also that thank, but also when we need to take action with elected officials. And that's something we take a lot of pride in.
It's probably a good idea for all of us, or any of us, never to stay silent when we hear a comment on the streets or in the workplace.
And that's people stay silent, then it becomes even more normalized and it becomes allowed in our society. And as a collective society, we cannot allow for this rhetoric to continue at the rate that it is.
All right, Evan. Well, that's the time we have.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for joining us. It's always very important topics that you and I discuss when you get here.